to do is do some traditional training and talk about the role of traditional training in the larger scheme. And what that is that not everything is directly, this is the way it is in the form, this is the way you fight. Some things are conceptual training. For example, we have what we call a side stance. Right? It's a side stance because, you know, like most people are used to like front stances or forward stances in martial arts. Like if that's the person I'm fighting, like this kind of stance or this kind of stance. Whereas if I was fighting in somebody in EJ's direction, you know, toward that window, my stance is sideways. Now it's still kind of a bow stance, where I'm turning to my left knee will bend. I'm turning to my right knee will bend. It's important to bend where you're turning, because if you leave this leg straight as you're turning into it, you'll feel a lot of pressure on your knee. The other leg will be a little bit straight because it'll almost be pushing, and that'll make your hip turn. Now, one advantage of this is that if you're like just standing there and the oh shit thing happens, you can go right from here into a technique. You know, it's nice if you had enough warning that you could take a stance. So like when we do the self-defense stuff, I say, if you feel like you're threatened, step back and put your hands up. This is a fighting position, but it doesn't look like a fighting position, at least from the point of view of after you crack somebody in the head and the cops show up later. The one thing that witnesses are reliable for is being unreliable. So even though this is a fighting stance, your hands are open, your hands are up, and you're going to announce loudly, I don't want any problems. So when the police come later, the guy had his hands up and said he didn't want any problems, even though he was like, I don't want any problems. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, anybody, law enforcement knows that witnesses are reliable for being unreliable. But this is, you don't have a chance to even do that. You can go right from a normal position into a side position. Now, this side stance, if you look at the tape that I'm standing on the floor, is basically east and west. And if I put my hands on my hips to represent my arms, well, they are my arms, they don't just represent my arms. They're north and south. And north, meaning where this arm is pointing right now, pardon me, is the person I'm fighting. So if you looked at me from the ceiling, you would see like a cross pattern, right? Like an X cross. So we start turning. So this is that wheeling body. Remember when the grips came and I told you to turn your hips and shoulders, turn your hips and shoulders? Also from a fighting point of view, right? You want to turn your hips and shoulders into what you're hitting. Turn your hips and shoulders into what you're hitting. I'm not like up on the balls of my feet necessarily like totally like we do in kickboxing, but I'm also not flat-footed. I'm kind of turning on the ball of my foot or the little space a little bit behind it, and I'm turning. So, one, this is teaching me to turn into every strike that I do. Second, like I said, it's somewhat functional because, you know, from, oh crap, I can get into some kind of stance where I can do techniques. It's going to work a little bit on the thoracic mobility. You know, if you're really tight, doing this is kind of a warm-up and a stretch. So what I think we should do is just for like a minute or two, play with this wheeling body idea. Just remember though that I'm still looking forward. I'm not looking here and then looking here. That's the biggest mistake you can make in this. I'm looking, like for example, I'm looking right at that window. And my attention remains there. And I'm trying to get my arms this way as I turn. This is a side stance and it's a wheeling body. And this develops what we call Liù Lì, the force that comes out of our waist. The first thing that you usually learn are straight punches. And if you go to like a karate school or taekwondo school, you might see people doing this. Whether they're doing it just standing or they're doing it like in a horse stance, or in Kyokushin they do what they call a sanshin dachi. But this is good for the idea of the center line. In other words, I'm not punching from my shoulder. If I punch from my shoulder, I'm leaving the whole middle open. Exactly, I gotta control the center line. Right? But the thing about this obviously is that this is not promoting the turning of my hips and shoulders, because actually I'm isolating my arm from my rest of my body. So when we do side stance, again, the punch is going to go straight down the middle, but I'm going to turn my hips and shoulders into it. The other thing you're going to notice is I'm going to extend this arm behind me. Not because it has practical fighting application, but because it's gonna pull, for example, I'm punching with my right now. So if I extend my left behind me, it makes sure that my left and my hip and my left shoulder are going behind me. And if it's going behind me, that means that my right hip and my right shoulder is turning even more into it. In other words, as opposed to like being like here, I want to be like here. You want to just stand here for a second? Oh, God. Okay, so, in other words, if I was just doing this, right? But I'm really not punching you, I'm punching to you, not through you. Use prepositions as our friends. So if I do this the long way, you can see that as I turn, I'm getting more extension, right? In other words, if I turn it, and when I'm standing, you see how I'm really making sure, because it's like drawing a bow. Like you can't shoot a bow if you just do this. You have to sort of do both. So in other words, as this one's going out, this one goes back. So conceptually, this is more conceptual. There's no application really for this rear hand, but it makes sure that I'm really turning into my punch. And certainly, if you looked at me from the ceiling, I would be a big X because my hands are extended north and south, and my feet are extended east and west. So let's try to do like maybe 20 punches. Making sure that you're not going too fast, and you're focusing on going through the middle, through the middle, through the middle. The punch can be either your face or what would be your solar plexus. So you can hit somebody in the sternums, but you're going to get more bang for the buck by hitting them in the solar plexus. Okay? So you have actually 6 basic fists that you and then from that there's a couple more. But there's 6 or teach vectors of force. It's the same like in Shingi, they have the 5 fists. Teaching vectors of force. In other words, how to generate power, whether you're punching straight, whether you're punching in a hooking position, whether you're punching with the back of your hand, like you're doing an uppercut, whether you're doing an overhand, that kind of stuff. I just want to show you a couple of basic ones today. So obviously straight. Next is hooking. So elbow wants to be up, right? I always talk about like if you're just doing this, you're not getting any power. You want to have straight from your knuckles to your wrist to your arm, and your arm parallel to the floor. You can be palm down or you can be palm facing, just like I always say in my kickboxing classes, right? Because some people are comfortable with this, some people are comfortable with this. Doesn't matter as long as you're straight. If you're like this or you're like this, that's not going to be good because, in other words, when you have a hook, it's basically like you don't have a wrist there. It's like when you sawed off your fist and glued it back on. And if you notice when I turn, I hit and I go through it to the point where my elbow ends up on that north-south line. Right? So in other words, I'm not just stopping here, I'm going here. Everybody see that? In other words, more. Here, more. Put your head around this way. In other words, I could do this. But what I'm going to do is this. Right? One, because I always want to have follow-through. I never want to hit to him, I want to hit through him. But also, like any good Mike Tyson fan can tell you, every hook is an elbow. Because if I miss with the hook, it could turn into an elbow. In fact, if his hand was up blocking, he might somewhat block the hook. But as I pull through, it creates opportunity for the elbow. So I'm coming to the point where my elbow lines up. So I'm not much of it. Okay. So it's not to here, but to here. And again, I'm trying to get hips and shoulders, so I'm not doing this. Right? It's like the 3 Stooges, you know? It's like your kid brother trying to make sure you're holding your head, you know? Turn, 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 turn. So this is your hooking power by turning your hips and shoulders. The side stance and the wheeling body, then it's not so hard to figure out how we train the different vectors of force. So you have straight, you have hook, and then you have uppercut. Now in Lama we have a long uppercut power, right? But today we can just do what they call the Jiao power. right? And that's the looking in the mirror. I talked about, Meian Jugay in the earlier session when you're looking in the mirror. This is an uppercut because you're looking, like if you're holding the mirror in your hand. So, but notice, two things. One, I'm making sure that I'm coming through the middle with my uppercut. I'm not coming here. Right? I'm not coming I'm coming straight in the middle. And also, I get to where my chin would be, and I keep going until I get my elbow to where my chin would be. And this could also be like an uppercut into an elbow, or it could be an upward elbow strike from the same mechanics. Because I'm not really working on the technique as much as I'm working on the vectors of force. Because again, it can be the long pow. We also have what they call a fan pow, which is the bottom of the fist coming underneath. I have Jiao pow, and I have the rising elbow. They're all the same. And then there's Pak Yik too, which is, just like with a crane weight. In other words, anything that's coming straight up is what we're working with this power. So I have Jiao power, right? You see, I go through the chin. I go through the chin. But also, I want to make sure, again, that this hand is out behind me, because otherwise I'll do this. This is okay, but it's obviously not as powerful as this. This, right? You see that hand going behind me? That means I'm really turning into my punches. So we do not fight this way, but we do these as drills. And again, it helps us get our hips and shoulders moving, and it helps us loosen up our shoulders if they're, all old and run down. So there's kind of a yogic benefit to doing things in a side stance format. Not necessarily one-to-one for fighting, but it helps our fighting. Final one in the structure. Overhand. People always think it's, like hammering. It's more of a diagonal cut. It's a 45-degree angle. Thinking about coming like from the temple all the way down to So it's kind of like throwing a ball. When after it comes up over my shoulder, again, it's not going straight down. It's cutting like this. And I never would want to, for example, in my fighting stance structure, just throw it here. I'm going to go on for a second. I'm going to hit your foot up. But in other words, overhand is not this, because if I do this and I'm standing right in front of you, he just punches me. Right? So, in fact, and we're going to see this, side stance does have application, but not necessarily just the way it is. No, right? In other words, I'm not going to throw overhand here. I'm going to throw overhand by stepping out so that my hands, right now, nose to nose, this is on this, both of our heads are on the same line, the center line. That's okay for my straight punches, but for my overhand, I want to take my head off of that line so that when I throw the overhand, it's harder to block and also it's harder for me to counter because I'm not right in front of you. Yeah, you'd have to do something like that. So that's why it's more like this than it's like this. We're not drilling overhands from a forward fighting stance. We're drilling it from side stance. And when you see side stance, excuse me for a second, I don't know if you can see this. Right, this is on the floor because of what I'm doing in the coaching class with you guys. For drilling, side stance is this. Just you stand and you start the class just doing the different techniques here. But where the real action comes is really these lines. And again, this is the V, which I was talking about, right? It's the top of the X or it's the V. This is a side stance. And remember, when I'm doing a side stance, my strikes are not here, right? I wasn't going strike to here, strike here. I was doing it like a T. So if I'm here, the T is here. If I step here, the T is here. So in other words, if I step here, the strike is there. If I step here, the strike is there. So if you want to throw you again, just sort of stand right up there. Put your hands up here. Don't break the lead. If I went here, I could do this. If I went here, I could do this. When I'm throwing that overhand, it's not here, it's here. I can throw the overhand here. You know what I'm saying? So, the side stance does have application. It's just not the application Your shoulder is what they call a ball and socket joint. So it's designed to do this. It's not designed to do this. If you do this, this is pulling on your rotator cuff, right? This is how people like tear their rotator cuff in tennis and doing like a forehand. They rip it out. If you do this, where you're actually rolling the ball in the socket, you can keep doing that. You can do it with a tremendous amount of force and you won't hurt yourself. Whereas if you do this, and they block, and you're pulling against this, that's what tears you. That's always what tears you. Okay, so we're going to just do over. It should feel like it should feel totally relaxed because if the ball and socket joint is being engaged, you're not really using force. You're just rolling it over. Remember, you have chun, which is your straight punches. You have bean, which is your back fist. You have bean chun. You have Hua, which is a 45-degree downward back fist. Hua. And you have your cup, which is the overhand. And I said that traditionally cup used to come straight over. This is the traditional way, but Chalde's not always twice at a 45-degree. That was his take on it, his innovation, so to speak. 45-degree. Then you mix them, you do Hua cup, just like you had bean by itself, and you had chun by itself, and you had bean chun. You have Hua cup, and you have fan pao, which is the bottom, the hammer fist part of the bottom of the fist coming up and over. Then you have the pow, which is the thumb side of the fist going straight up. And again, everything I'm doing is on that subji, that cross pattern, right? I'm not like going over here and going over here. All my strikes are toward the camera, but my feet are on the east-west line. And then you have fan pao, pow. We did Jugang Pow, which is an uppercut with the palm facing you. Jugang meaning to look in the mirror. So I'm looking in the mirror. And we had the gawk, which is the hook. And I talked also earlier, so you guys can go back and start looking through the videos, for the wheeling hand that set this up. The wheeling hand that set up the gawk, and the wheeling hand that set up the Jugang Pow. That's a movement in itself. It's a block, it's a redirection, it's a clearing, it's in the grappling also. And this is pretty much all the basic fist seeds, the kunjung that we did in this side stance. Remember, you have chun, which is your straight punches. You have bean, which is your back fist. You have bean chun. Which is a 45-degree downward back fist. Wah. And the overhand. And I said that traditionally cup used to come straight over. This is the traditional way, but Chalde's not always twice at a 45-degree. That was his take on it, his innovation, so to speak. 45 degrees. Then you mix them, you do Hua cup, just like And you have fan pao, which is the bottom, you know, the hammer fist part of the bottom of the fist coming up and over. Up and over. Up and over. Then but my feet are on the east-west line. And then you have fan pao, pow, fan pao, pow. We did Jugen Pow, which is an uppercut with the palm facing you. Jugen meaning to look in the mirror. So I'm looking in the mirror.